Welcome to the Heartbeat Podcast with your host, Mike Summer, where CIOs get what they won't hear anywhere else. Candid insights, real strategies, and the truth about leading tech in a world that's changing faster than ever.
Welcome to Heartbeat, tactical insights for CIOs, where we cut through the noise and get real about AI leadership, digital transformation, and the human side of tech. I'm Mike Summer, and today we're exploring what automation can't replace, building relationships, managing through conversations, and leading with impact. Our guest, Glenn Stofel, is a powerhouse in business strategy in AI-driven transformation. As Chief Strategy Officer at Moono, he's pioneering the first AI solution for system integration, streamlining professional services and unlocking new revenue streams. Beyond AI, Glenn is also co-founder of Camp4, helping leaders develop the tough skills that make technology work for people, not the other way around.
Mike, thank you very much.
Maybe you can just tell us about your journey of where you started and where you are now, because you've worked in quite a few different roles and you have quite an exciting past.
I've been in the cloud consulting space since the early days of Salesforce.com. We were one of the first Salesforce.com implementers at a company called Bluewolf. And we got into the deployment business of helping companies set up that technology, Salesforce at the time. And yeah, my role early was go first, sell the deal, deliver the deal. So I've been on all kind of aspects of running professional services firms and helping small companies, medium companies, and enterprises use technology to transform their companies.
Now, Bluewolf had a reputation of punching above its weight. Can you give us a bit of insight as to how you accomplished that?
Moxie, I will say that the two founders had an uncanny knack for talent and putting, how do I put it, non-obvious teams together. I would say, like, it wasn't all about the Harvard grad. I have nothing against Harvard. I'm just saying it wasn't like a stereotypical thing. It was about attitude and roll up the sleeves. And yeah, I just think there's a rallying cry. And I think, again, this is an interesting moment in technology where it's really a place to level the playing field, whether you're a consultant or whether you're a CIO. The technology is such that actually it's allowing people to punch above their weight. I was on a call yesterday with a professional services shop, about 60 people. So a good sized business, person's been running it for a while. And they said this moment in time with the unlock with generative AI, he's not asking himself, how do I scale? He actually asked, how small can I be? Meaning how efficient? Like, what can my footprint be? How can I make that technical and footprint smaller to be able to have a better lifestyle, to be able to run my business more effectively, to drive more profit? Technology is actually, I think it's a boon for smaller companies and for thinking about how efficient we can be. So
I think that's a really keen insight. And it's so important to understand culture. Does the culture of a business want to take advantage to amplify and decrease their footprint, like you said, or to slingshot ahead of current capabilities and skill sets? What are you seeing?
let's unpack culture in a moment, but the moment is about deciding how you'll spend productivity. So if you believe that I'm going to go down generative AI and if we use that as a lens, if there's productivity gains to be had, the clarity of those two choices of, hey, I'm going to actually use this to stay small and be really profitable and run my lifestyle versus I'm going to use it to scale is just a question of how I want to spend my productivity. The cultural tenet is about clarity of strategy. Well, who are we? I don't judge that person who doesn't want to scale their business to run the linear rat race of growing a professional services firm, but it's just about clarity. How are you trying to use that productivity? What is your clarity on your strategy and your culture? And I think the cultural piece there is a kind of a big deal as it relates to rallying the troops towards whatever that end is.
Do you believe that there is a moment in time where you could see that technology was redefining business strategy before generative AI came and really amplified it? Is there a moment before this that really stood out to you where it has led to some changes in your career trajectory?
So there's a couple of things I could hit upon through the process. Like, you could take IoT, machine learning. I think every one of those was an opportunity for people to look at and answer a question. We have to do it. And I think generative AI is no different in that I don't think anybody should be looking for new problems to solve in their business. If you're an enterprise, mid-market enterprise like CIO, the question is, how could this new technology help me answer the old questions? The stuff that's still going wrong, the stuff that's still a bottleneck, the stuff that's still holding us back or wasting time. You already have these problems today. And by the way, the answer might be this particular problem. It's actually not a good use case for generative AI. These three problems, not a good use case. These, yeah, you should really be trying to push the envelope there. And that's also about helping people manage sort of that jagged frontier of AI. Where is it good and where is it still a little bit not quite there?
Just because you can use AI for something doesn't mean you should. If we look to CES this year, AI was embedded in everything. So going back to your career where you've seen successful implementations of digital transformation or innovation overall, what would you say are some of the fundamentals that are absolutely key to get done right first before you start looking at doing something new or taking a hold of some of these new technologies coming down the pipeline?
It's one word to me, it's alignment. And one of the things that we had to do as a growing professional services firm, and as we went up market, was to be able to engage with our customers and make sure that what we were building was actually going to move the needle, was actually aligned with helping them move themselves into market, was helping them deal with whatever was necessitating change at their moment in their company, their moment in their industry, whatever was disrupting them or driving them forward. That alignment meant get in the room with the client executives and make sure it wasn't about rewriting their strategy, but just making sure we understood their strategy, made sure we got rid of the illusion of agreement. Oh, we should set up CPQ. And three people, out of 8 people you had at the meeting, there was 10 different perspectives on CPQ. So getting that alignment, what should we build and why? Again, not technology related at all, like no technology. But when you didn't go through that process and you believe the hype of what the technology should be able to do, panacea. And again, that's just because, wow, there's great hype machines out there. Then you could really build stuff that's not either not going to matter or going to miss the mark, or where this person thought it was supposed to do this and this other executive was supposed to do that. They both use the word CPQ, blown projects. The other side of the equation, which is you're building this for people to do their jobs more effectively, doing rep rides, doing agent shadowing, really understanding the perspective of the people that this is actually, whose lives this is going to change. Nothing to do with the technology, because it's about putting the technology more naturally in their path of work. All the change management stuff, which I know you spend a lot of time thinking about as well. So like the starting point into that question is two things that really have nothing to do with technology.
Do you feel that there's any trends that are flying under the radar that have the potential of shaping or reshaping, whether it's IT consulting and professional services or the role of the CIO?
I can tell you that the one trend that we're hanging our head on in our current company, Moono, is answering the question, can generative AI help deal with two systemic challenges for consultancies, systems implementers? And as way of a parallel, the consulting process that we go through to engage, translate that into business cases and translate that into epics and user stories and functional and technical specs, and that whole continuum of then transforming and using the technology to help the company transform. That process, if you're a Bluewolf, a systems implementation firm, it's the same process if you are an internal IT team whose job is to go talk to your internal clients about what they need and translate that into requirements and translate that into real software and roll it out and the whole thing. It's there's a parallel there that I think is important. And again, one trend that you can't ignore, generative AI. And then the question would be, where is that technology impactful to that continuum that I just described? Historically, if you're a systems implementation firm, you have two challenges. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you, Mike. You close a deal, you celebrate for about a half a minute, and then you go, wait, we have to hire and staff. Like we need people to go do that technology project.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that dissimilar from something got budgeted in the IT department. And wow, okay, we got approval for this project. We got to hire and staff potentially, or reorganize our staff, reprioritize, same basic thing. That's like the linear rat race of growing professional services. And what generative AI holds the promise of doing is making you more productive per billable or non-billable person, and therefore more nonlinear growth, more ability to have bigger impact, smaller teams. So that's a technology trend. And the reality is, in that space, generative AI is a really good use case, because what does generative AI do? What do large language models do? They're really good at text. They're really good at taking inputs and gelling them into cohesive narratives in whatever way, shape, or form that makes sense for your business. So in much the same way, like you're watching Harvey do this for the legal profession, we're doing it for the consulting profession. And there's a lot of transformative use cases sitting within there, a lot of productivity gains to be had. We're going to age-old problems of dealing with emerging requirements and scope creep. The speed with which you can generate the first drafts is mind-blowing, right? Does it fit? Does it make sense for this particular problem in this particular marketplace?
So if I'm wearing the lens of a CIO or wearing the hat of a CIO, and I look at the situation that you've just presented, which is I have a number of requirements. One use case is you take the traditional approach of you bring someone on your team and you have to onboard them and you say, here's our SharePoint folder or here's our repertoire of all the things that we've done. And you're asking that individual to go through, sort, and make sense of a collection of information versus another that says, here's all the information. And now I've extracted the important points. I've documented this in a way, in a format that is understandable, and that person can adjust it very quickly. What's the pro and con to each approach?
Which is important. So who arbitrates what's important, right? So you've got a methodological sort of thing sitting underneath that word importance, right? So what does good look like when I analyze that information? What format am I trying to get it into so that it's digestible by the business or the technologist, right? So I think the methodology there, and I think that's a key thing with this technology, is indoctrinating your methodology into these agents so that the human is more likely to do that thing the way, again, the Bluewolf way, the blank way, like name your, you know,
Sure. I think one of the biggest challenges right now when people hear the word LLM or large language model is it both knows everything and nothing at the same time. And you have to train it. You have to give it the criteria on, I want you to do this. I don't want you to do that. And I think the next change and next iteration we're going to see is, more niche or small language models whereby it's trained to do a very specific task. If I understand what you're saying is you're building in fundamental logic and intelligence underneath it, essentially to say, I want you to look at this information and I want you to present it in this way so that it accomplishes this business goal versus giving it to more of a larger model where you're not sure what the output is and there's no control around it. And I think that's one of the frustrations that people are seeing with whether it's the chat GPTs or the Anthropics or Grok or whatever tool that we're using. It's so large and there's no way of determining what the logic is that was used to derive your output versus building something more on the agent or the agentic approach of customizing thing. I only want you to do this and I want you to base it off of this set of information and material. I think that's where the trend is going. Would you agree?
a couple of things there. First, like the large language models are good at different things. So there's the first idea is how can I use the different large language models to do the things that they're good at? So do you need large language model abstraction orchestration in order to, number one, select the right one for the right job? Some are really good at writing code. To your point, like ServiceNow has a Star Coder LLM that's just about writing code on their platform, for example. So you're right, there will be more models, not less. The speed with which these models are coming out means that what we're trying to do is make sure we put our customers in a position to use the large language models that are right for the task, that are the newest, if that is the most effective or efficient, because that's two different things: effectiveness for the task at hand and efficiency of speed, efficiency of processing. So that's an underlying assumption that I've got that interoperability. But now let me give you like a business scenario to see where that plays out. Because the second thing is there is the greater information of what's out there in the large language models, but then there's also a grounding that you want to give it in your data. You hear vector databases, you hear RAG, you hear graph RAG, like this is some of the underlying technology. All that means is I'm organizing my data in a way that makes it really effective to go and communicate with large language models. But it is grounding at what you think is important, what you think is the right way to do it, and what you think is your unique secret sauce for the way you apply your craft. And it's that combination. Now let's put it into a business scenario. Let me start at the top of the consulting funnel. I'll use it from a systems implementation point of view. Let's say I get an RFP from a client. I need to go build this thing. Please give me a quote, right? Tell me what it's going to take to do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, first things first, like I need to understand that RFP. I need to read it. And so let's say this is a scenario where they have a particular migration. They're trying to move from, let's say it's the classic user interface of Salesforce. They're trying to move to Lightning, right? I can train my agent to read that RFP. But what am I really asking it to do is read that RFP, read the org metadata from that client's org of how it currently is, and correlate that to what I know the future functionality is of going to that new UI,
Mm-hmm.
and build me a logical sequence of things I would need to do to go build to move me along that path, right? Great use case for large language models. But if you think that in a demo, I might say, so then I want you to take all that and write me a set of user stories.
Mm-hmm.
And then from those user stories, write me a technical implementation approach and use story points to scope it. Now, I'm going to ground that in Salesforce's implementation guides. I don't want you to paint outside the bounds. I don't want you to get creative and tell me Salesforce can do things it can't do. That's not helpful. It's also an RFP. So I don't want you to be too creative. You have to answer every single aspect of the RFP. Again, you're giving the prompt instructions to large language models. You can move tokens and temperature and context windows to be more creative, less creative. So you're trying to hone in. The second thing is, again, I'm dealing with a top of the funnel. No client speaks in prompt engineered speak. They just speak. So certain models are better at dealing with that broader context, looser input, less structure, right? Whereas later in the bill, I'm going to bring out some models that are really good at writing code. So again, which model's right for the job? Which information do I ground that says this is mine? And the last thing I'll say is I'm creating an RFP response. There might be a standard template or way that we like to respond to RFPs with a bunch of stock answers and then the nuanced answers. And I need to put all that together. That's again, my methodology coming forward. I'm grounding it in the way we do things. In that demo that I don't tell it what my scoping methodology is. I actually allow the large language model to figure that out just to prove the point that it's possible. But then I tell the customer what you really should be doing is grounding it in your scoping model, right? Just because it can doesn't mean you should, but that's the balancing act.
And I think that is so important because if you're competing against other SIs or if you're trying to define something internal, if you're not adding your own flavor to it, are you really going to be able to even execute upon it? Because if they came back with a set of steps that is well outside of your scope or what you know how to do, you're going to set yourself up to fail. Versus if you were to say, here's my grounding material, and this is what good looks like. I want you to reference and to present and output in this way. It can also help when you're presenting this back to whether it's an internal team or to a client to say, we use AI just like every other person you're talking to, but we're approaching it in this way to create not only the differentiation, but here's our secret sauce no one else has access to. And I think it's that blend and hybrid approach that is really going to be key because at some point it's just going to be an assumed approach that everyone's using the fundamentals of AI. Now, what are you doing different?
And I'll give you another like really simple example. I was working with, they're now a customer, but when they were a prospect, I was creating an agent. And the fundamental underlying thing they said is they said basically like in different words, like, how do I unlock our secret sauce? And the example was like, I was using this agent to help me do some solution architecture. And this was Service Cloud Voice. They'd done a lot of work with Service Cloud Voice as an example. Of course, you'd want that agent grounded in, again, what is a Salesforce Service Cloud Voice implementation guide? I don't want this thing to paint outside the bounds of what the tech can do. The agent I created was called What Would Diego Do? Because they have a handful of these people, but Diego happened to be like one of their uber experts in Service Cloud Voice. What they really want employee N+1 to do when they come in and do the next solution, yes, grounded in the tech. They also want to ground it in what would Diego do? What is our secret sauce? What do we know about what it actually takes to deploy it? What are our incremental steps that we always add that type of implementation more successful? What are the 6 lessons we've already learned on these other projects that we can bring to bear on this one? Because again, those technologists walk out the door, those consultants walk out the door. So we're grounding an agent now, not only in the tech, but in my greater secret recipe and our experience base that hasn't been possible before. But that's also where this is why it's a boon for boutiques and smaller firms, because that's what you're going to differentiate on. It comes back to your methods. And if you don't have one and you're just an implementer, those are folks who should be worried.
Absolutely. I want to go back to culture, and I would like for you to share some of your experience at Camp Forward. How important is it for companies to bring on the right people from the very onset of an engagement, whether it's a partner or an internal team, to lead to that versus just hiring whoever has technical skill?
Yeah. So cultural fit. This starts with clarity. And so this might unpack slowly, but bear with me. We had somebody come speak to us about culture along the trajectory when we were building Bluewolf. And the thing that I remember most clearly about it, his name is Stan Slapp, and I forget the name of his book at the moment, but you might be able to reference it in the notes later. He had to tell our leadership team, we were pretty proud that we were building a culture. We thought we were doing some cool stuff. We valued that. He's the one who told us, you're actually not part of your culture. As a leadership team, you're not part of your culture. You can only influence it. It happens outside of you. And I don't know where the truth lies there, but minimally, it's a great mental exercise to put yourself outside of that and have to look at it as a thing, to be influenced and to be nurtured and to be brought along. But the thing that makes it work, we realized, was first, you have to be clear on who you are, where we're going, and what any change might do to change that. And so that's clarity. We know who we are. We know what our values are. We know the type of culture we espouse. Then it gets to your resource question. How clear are we when we're talking to those folks about this is the way we roll here? What is the delta between their actual experience when they do start rolling with you and what the hell it is you're saying as a leadership team? And the culture is so good at, at, at finding the inconsistencies between those two things, you know? So I think it starts with clarity. And I think to that extent, if that's a cultural tenet, that this is the way we roll. And part of the way we roll is like, this is how we share knowledge and this is why it's going to help you. So you're not trying to build a fiefdom. You're not trying to keep your stuff to yourself. If that's part of the way you roll, that's communicated. And if that's felt and reciprocated and they feel like they grow by sharing, then you're okay.
So staying on culture for a second, we've gone through a significant shift over the past 2 years where it used to be everyone would travel and you would have a lot of in-person meetings. COVID hit and we went from everyone was sitting next to one another to a complete remote world. And there's been a lot of individuals who entered into the workforce who were remote only. We're now going back to whether it's a mandated in person or return to office or a hybrid of some sort. How do CIOs help to foster culture and to foster that level of connectiveness in a world where it may not be physically possible to be in the same room?
It takes work. Number one, part of when Karen and I were starting Camp 4, it was literally in that moment. And in Camp 4, what is about helping consultancies, teaching people what we call the tough skills. But again, that means how good am I at interacting with a customer, running a room, all of those skills of interacting with customers, listening, questions, facilitating. That's a game changer when you used to do that exclusively in the room. It takes different techniques and different strategies to do that in a Zoom, if you will. So we had to rewrite some of how we would engage. Smaller chunks, smaller teams, change the frequency. Some things that work in a room do not work in a Zoom. Something that work better in a Zoom, by the way. Example, when you run a Zoom and you're doing whiteboard and you're using a mural, you have 100% fidelity of capture.
Yes.
Versus when you used to do it with Post-it notes and things would pop off the wall and you'd be like, oh, I think I remember who put that up there, what they said. Back to the remote in the same way, whatever you were doing when you were bringing the team together physically and in person, the intent of the output of that still might be your intent. You might need to change the modality. You might need to change the modalities and be extra thoughtful. And it's not impossible, but it's a change.
How important would you say it is when doing these Zoom calls for everyone to have their camera on versus just audio?
That is very much back to a cultural question. I do some facilitation. And so what I like to do is explain what that does for me in running a meeting to be able to see people and have that interaction. When you're in a room, in addition to going through, say, a methodological set of steps you're going through with which to structure a conversation and get a certain type of output, you can also viscerally feel the energy. You can see people's subtle reactions. You can see this just on somebody's face.
Mm-hmm.
And if your job is to unlock and get the conversation going, well, there's techniques that facilitators use in a room. You're handicapped a little bit, if you will. Like you don't have all the same things. So what I find is you have to actually explain to people, this is this type of meeting. This is what we're trying to do. This is why it's important you have your camera on. Set that expectation way ahead of time. We also realize that it hasn't happened to you or I yet, but somebody could walk behind the scenes. Somebody could knock on a door. Since you are potentially at home, life is happening. Now in pandemic, that was just insane. But now it's a little more routine and people are more accustomed. People are more respectful. I think more empathetic as a result. But I think that's all about setting up good expectations and good meetings and good facilitation and just telling people this is why that's important. In some cases, we know that you might need to tune out, but if you need to shut off your screen for a minute, make sure you're coming back because we're running this type of exercise.
I think it's the setting of expectations and really relying upon and trusting the people you work with, which is key. I heard a story once where this is a legal situation where the lawyers were doing a brief to the judge, and the judge felt like he was being disrespected, that he wasn't being taken seriously, and he made everyone stand up and show that they were not wearing pajamas. I think trust is also critically important because there are individuals, especially with specific skill sets, that work better in a remote environment. The developers, those who are hands on keyboard, they need to be in a place where maybe it's less distractions or they might work in different hours. But if the expectation is set that I don't mind how you do your work and what modality you do your work, so long as you complete your work. And if you're held to a high standard and you complete, I think there's a lot of flexibility that can be provided. But I'm wondering for this younger generation that's coming in that is maybe not used to the ways of doing business that we used to do, of showing up and the expectations of this is how you present yourself at a meeting. This is how you talk and engage with people. How is that now being affected with the implementation of AI, where there's no longer a need to think creatively or to understand why the problem is existing before you apply technology to it, which I feel is something that Bluewolf did really was they brought in people with skill sets from different backgrounds and different forms of education. So when they were in a room, they could provide multiple points of view that actually made the entire team stronger. Can you talk to a little bit of what you would provide as advice for whether it's for a younger person looking to get in or for someone who's looking to hire a younger person and bring them into the team?
I'll talk about how I think the future of education and training needs to change.
We're talking about how education can provide different levels of education, how that can contribute to a team.
What I tell customers is your human ceremonies just became more important when the means of production of the first draft of something is so rapid. And what is your ceremony? And again, this actually ties back to when we have these ceremonies and what's the meeting and is that in person or is that on the stand up, and the whole remote thing comes into that as well. But either way, by design, yes, you can generate this set of user stories. Now you're going to actually go defend them and go toe to toe with somebody. Be prepared for that. And it's in the changing of the modality of it's not just like you hand in your homework. I have a good buddy of mine who teaches 7th and 8th grade, like in a cycle, 7th grade, 8th grade, repeat, right? Just has them for 2 years. Social studies. ChatGPT comes out. Kids are clearly generating homework.
You can tell.
He did was, and we talked about this, he changed the assignment. He said, now you're going to come in and present what you wrote, what you produced, right? It wasn't about reading the paper and marking it up anymore. If you can produce the paper, now you have to actually verbally present it and defend it. I think somewhere in there is part of the thread to the answer of, because I agree with you, it's twofold. One is we learned a lot. We had everybody in the office. So there's a lot of that happening, that informal learning of, hey, have you ever seen it? I think that's a miss. And I think if you have a flexible workforce, you have to figure out how to mimic that remotely or do some combination of getting people together from time to time, right? And then secondly, if you're the person creating the learning and development track for people, you have to be really thoughtful to how you're teaching people what good looks like or why something's good. And it's got to be a combination of that. I train somebody, but also those ceremonies where you have to go defend it, right? So anyway, I think the whole learning path becomes very different because of generative AI, because you can produce the thing very quickly. Do you know what good is?
Allowing for a lot of creativity to come in, because it doesn't matter how you came up with the answer. If you were involved and you use tools or you use technology to amplify your thoughts or to go down more creative rabbit holes, you have to then bring it back and be able to present it. And that's a higher level of functionality or cognitive ability, which I think is actually where we want to focus as an organization and as a country. Every time there's a new technology, the rule that comes, yes, there are roles that are made redundant, but it also creates opportunity for those same individuals to get upskilled into something else. Exciting opportunities is to get rid of the stuff that really no one wanted to do or the stuff that was really tedious
Totally.
and allowing for there to be more collaboration or bring in some out of the box thinking that will help move the needle forward, which then ties back to if I can achieve the business outcome by doing something other than just simply lifting and shifting old ways of thinking, why would I as a company not want to encourage this? And so I think it's almost forcing whether it's executives or companies that are providing services for businesses to go, the standard is now so high, I have to do something different to stand out. Those that do, I think, will win. And those that rely upon traditional ways of doing things, just going, I'm just going to call it in and I'm just going to use AI, I think they're going to get spanked. What advice would you give to your younger self if you were stepping into a role of leadership and this is your first time, whether it's becoming a senior leader in a company or you're standing in front of a room leading the next generation? What would you say?
Speaking to my younger self, I don't know. I've never felt like I haven't been my younger self, even though you're talking to a kind of the white beard. Like, so I don't, it's an interesting question. If I were to talk to somebody early in their career, in the career that you and I have come up through, technology transformation, consulting, I would say embrace the tools, embrace these new tools, get really good at using them, recognize that the tools plus your own agency and creativity is actually what the thing is. The second thing I would tell is get really good at human interaction. It's the other side of the same coin. If you can automate certain things, it frees you up to spend more time with clients. You better be damn good at spending time with clients, gathering consensus, because the LLMs are a capture of old stuff, of knowledge in the past, and good at predicting language within that confine. Innovation is going to happen at the cross section of that meets like what is new thought. And that is going to happen when you get people in a room or in a Zoom and you collaborate and you see that sort of creativity happening. I think this is like a moment in time where a 22-year-old getting their first job really get good at running a room, at facilitating, at understanding emotional intelligence and all of that side of it. Because I think that it's going to be those two things that are going to be differentiator.
So last question for you. You built and led multiple successful companies. What really motivates you?
We're at a moment of change. It's real. But what motivates me is the energy of being involved in what's next and taking the lessons I've learned from being in this space and applying them to this new moment. And so it's really just about the energy of that. It's also about the moment of creation of a company in the early phases. I enjoy the early phases of growing a company. Yeah, that's that. And I'm talking to you today from my parents' historic cabin, the same as if I was in an office. So there's a nice balance is what's motivating to me.
I just want to say thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you.